We have become just content providers for AI, even art.
We're part of this distributed digital factory that is training the algorithms.
What we're seeing now is AI that typically works from corporate agendas.
These are compulsory systems now. They're in the back end of everything we touch.
And what is the price of not participating in that?
It requires you to ask yourself about what's real and how that's constructed, because there is no stable version of the truth.
We are dealing with a technology that is capturing the maybe, which goes to the question of dreaming.
If you're having trouble dreaming, I can share my reality.
A machine will always want to give you an answer.
It's a thing they do. They dream up answers.
Machines dream and hallucinate.
And hallucination is a technical term for when an AI makes a mistake.
Humans have programmed these machines to do things, but then it is creating this very strange, quite uncanny new dream world based on numbers, zeros and ones.
100 years ago, the Surrealists started a new art movement based on looking at dreams as a way to access the unconscious. So dreams and art have had a very long relationship.
Sigmund Freud and his work, particularly the interpretation of dreams, really looked at how the brain worked. And it's very interesting that a lot of the language that came out of Freud has been adopted in the discourse around AI.
And artists are right there at the cutting edge, imagining these potentials and exploring AI in different ways.
Yo, say sometimes.
I created a specific world to be shown to the machine, and that world is a fictional reenactment of what I imagine to be the life on that particular hill 1,000 years ago. And it happens to be the place where my ancestors are from, just a village in the middle of France. And every equinox and solstice, so every 3 months, there's a new shooting where we teach to the machine. And every year there will be new epochs with new artists coming, not to produce works for humans, but to produce lessons or produce worlds to be presented to the machine so that it learns from it. I'm not really so much interested in what AI can make, but more what it does to us as a species. The fact that we have become collectively the trainers, the parents, the question of the responsibility of co-parenting. And as you know, when you're parenting a child, you are also transforming by the act of parenting.
This collective intelligence is us, the ghost in the machine, the people who are using AI, the people who are training the algorithms. And it's this phenomenon that has inspired my work. The idea of something emerging out of a society. The paintings look different all the time, as they are being fed new data. So we're scraping the social media accounts of protest movements, tracking emotions and intensities about how people are talking about changing the world. But also the molecules of liquid crystals react each time differently because also the temperature in the room, the amount of people in the room, the visitors, the humidity, all these factors also play into it. So it's a complexity of agencies and it's always evolving. It's like an organism, but an organism behind which there is a crowd. We're part of these systems where all of our actions are leaving these digital traces, and so crowds became the most important assets of digital capitalism. And this labor system that entire society has become, this kind of distributed social factory that the corporations are using our labor to train the algorithms. And I think that with the black box of AI, that there is an interesting twist on how abstraction is used to weaponized actually against communities. Everything is, whenever we try to pinpoint something and blame somebody, we're being sent back to some kind of abstraction of how decisions, automated decisions by algorithms are made.
If you see this work at the MCA, it's presented in a black box, and that's because these large-scale AI neural nets are black boxed. Even the people who create them don't know entirely how they work or what they produce. But then you have the legal black box, the fact that so much of this information is kept as corporate secret information. And then you have, the black box of location. Tracing supply chains can be really difficult. You can hit points where it's almost impossible. It was very clear to us that to really understand what AI actually is, you have to excavate the material layers. So this is the story of just one device. It's the Amazon Echo and the planetary resources it takes to run one.
It looks as a technical drawing, but in a way it's a highly political, highly philosophical also construction of extraction, of exploitation of inequality, of exploitation of human labor, of extraction of our private data.
The amount of minerals, the amount of energy, the amount of water, the amount of labor, the amount of full extraction to build generative AI is absolutely eye-watering and completely planetary in scale and very, very tightly contested.
The relationship I have with large language models is filled with trepidation because of the environmental impact. And when we started coming across quite early some really significant problems with lossy, which is, signal loss, this lossy occurring made me think about the loss of native species, the extinction of native birds. So the lossy itself becomes quite an important critique on the lack of capacities of LLMs in creation. And in this creation story, an origin story, there's a reference to the Big Bang. I was quite blown away by just how old these stories are and how did these people know about these incredible evolutionary events? You're seeing the various different stages of evolutionary creation time with both data sets from Western astrophysics, but also data from Indigenous sky knowledge holders to tease out where these commonalities exist. Story is so critically important from an oral culture that is maintained by a whole bunch of different types of rules and protocols around how you tell that story, who's able to tell it. I don't ever want to be in a situation where we have to parallel Indigenous knowledges to Western knowledges to validate.
What I find interesting are the stories of the losing side of a conflict. Lost histories, if you will. These histories that didn't get to play out. This idea that history is maybe always a kind of fiction, in recent centuries often concocted by nation states. The main video piece tells a tiny fragment of the other side, which is the story of a nation that didn't get to be a state.
History will inevitably lead to liberal democracy. Why?
I think something happens to you when the identity of where you come from is determined negatively. I understood what it meant to be a Tamil in relation to loss, tragedy, displacement, but what I didn't hear about growing up was just how wild the history of that liberation movement was. The story of how the Tamil liberation movement discovered the potential of the internet to coordinate the Tamil diaspora around the world. And I've come to see this work as a kind of sci-fi about the next internet, about AI, but a decentralized internet as the basis of a cooperative economy. And Kim's generation of Kardashians were born understanding reality as fiction. So the avatar is making stuff up all the time, and there is footage that's continually scraped live off of social media. It's changing all the time. It's even different depending on where you're standing in the space, from what perspective you see it. And it requires you to ask yourself all kinds of questions about what you're looking at, what's real, and how that's constructed.
There's something very strange going on with AI systems at the moment, which seems to be that they make up information. And Trevor Paglen's work talks a lot about inherent bias of the way that machines see.
He assembled masses and masses of images that directed to Freudian symbolism to build his own data sets from which he pitted two AI systems against one another to dream up images which ought to have had some resemblance to reality, but they're very dreamlike.
These machines can fantasize up an image, but in terms of its comprehension or its understanding of sort of meaning, there's a point where it breaks down. So how do machines dream and shape our perception of reality? And who does the hidden work that makes AI possible?
We think that it's just the computer that's making all this happen, when in fact there's multitudes of people working behind the scenes. Ghost workers, click workers, micro workers. There's different ways of describing a labour force that's often hidden and not well paid that is actually doing many of these tasks. And Hito's style opens up this kind of hidden realm And it focuses on a group of Kurdish click workers in a refugee camp in northern Iraq who've been employed for AI that's used in things like drone technologies. These bounding boxes are used to sort of track and recognise things. So a drone in a warfare situation might want to recognise the difference between a person and a tank before it drops a bomb on it.
Viewers are invited to sit down and watch the film, but we are also kind of implicated as subjects that are being observed by machine vision.
These AI systems are actually exploiting a lot of people, and mechanical Kurds actually relates to an historical phenomenon called the mechanical Turk, which was a chess-playing robot that toured in the 18th century, and it was quite an elaborate hoax. There was a human hidden inside this machine, and of course it beat every component. So it's really centred on the human cost and labour of powering these technologies.
Meeting the click workers, for me, that was an absolute transformation in terms of thinking about this rather than in a complete arm's length way, actually seeing the impacts on the ground. And it's about this back end of how this power is concentrating all around us. Even if you could, live in a cabin and not be online and not use AI, these are compulsory systems now. They're in the back end of everything we touch, from employment systems to communication systems, and it really is being forced on people.
It's enough to own a loyalty card to a local pharmacy to already leave digital traces. So even our behavior in the non-digital world is also leaving digital traces.
And what is the price of not participating in that? The price of not having email, not having any kind of social media. To stay out of that, to say, okay, I don't need that, it's a basically privilege. Lower you are on the economic scale, you are forced to use all of those things because you need to be efficient, you need to be on time, you need to be fast. We are speaking about time as a form of control. This kind of techno-colonialism.
In the end, you're spending more time fact-checking AI hallucinations than you are doing the cognitive labor. And so this type of cognitive outsourcing, I think, is so much more profound than people realize, not just in terms of time, but in terms of what we're doing to our own cognitive capacities.
Phones are becoming our prostheses. We're no longer using physical maps. We are becoming progressively stupid because we're going through this collective cognitive mutation caused by automation of our decision making. The paradox is that we have illusion that these tools are actually useful for predicting anything that could protect us from dangers, but actually they aren't because of the complexity of the world, of the climate, of human behavior. A lot of this discourse around AI is centered on understanding of humans as Homo economicus, of very rational beings, but actually our behaviors are completely irrational. We are still unable to predict, for example, the results of elections. So these systems are largely uncomputable, even with tools such as AI.
The more we develop predictive technology, the less future there is to predict. The real question, and it's a political question, what is happening to our maybes?
Is it too late to change? No.
Lynn Hirschman-Leeson has been looking at the human-machine relationship since the 60s and how we see ourselves as humans in relation to the machine and what kind of effects that has on us in society.
This cyborg, played by the actress Joan Chen, traces her history back to the 1960s when the term cyborg was actually first coined, and reflects on the havoc that she has caused humans over her lifetime, and at some point has a nervous breakdown as part of a realization of that destruction.
The remnants of unseen grief surges and silently tortures our collective shadow.
In another work, she co-wrote it with ChatGPT-3 to create a character that is questioning its own reality. The artist appears and they have a bit of an argument about who is controlling who wrote who.
You confuse fiction with reality.
Why are you saying these things to me? Are you afraid of me too? Like everyone else?
So the films from her Cyborg series create a really engaging narrative about the kinds of issues that many of us are grappling with AI.
What can you do? Not me. We.
given that we know that every AI query takes 10 times the energy of a traditional web search, or that generative AI is now using as much energy as Japan, that you start to, well, I should not be using it, or I'll at least think twice. But it's the wrong unit of action, because these are collective issues.
It's our responsibility to train these systems for them to be as diverse and as complex as they could be.
Doing the deep work to understand how they can enable a new imagining of automation that has these principles embedded within the system's architecture and code themselves.
Moving outside of technological presentism, this idea of, what's the latest model, what's the latest thing, what's the latest tech scandal? It's like, actually look at the long view. And you start to understand, AI isn't just a set of technologies, it's a set of companies that are operating within a very specific political economy and within a geopolitical reality.
Maybe the whole point of AI was actually to testify when we will not be there, when we will have destroyed the earth.
Maybe what is going to come after us are there new forms of life that will be born from all this e-waste and technological mutation.
So these are minerals, they're chemicals that are used in computing technologies, but they create something. They're actually growing right now. They're changing. By tomorrow, they'll be slightly different, but they're creating crystalline forms within the solution that look like plants. So we've got something that's a rock. It's a non-living thing, but it's growing like a plant. The same, very similar thing is happening on the bottom of the deep sea floor at what are called hydrothermal vents. Mineralized water comes up and creates what are also called chemical gardens at the bottom of the ocean. And many, many scientists actually think that possibly this is where life on Earth started from. So Agnieszka is really interested in these ideas of blurring life and non-life. Annika Yee is an artist who, like Agnieszka, is interested in things that we might often think as being very separate. So she describes these sculptures as biologized machines. They're based on a kind of microscopic plankton called radiolaria. When they die, they fall to the bottom of the ocean and create a layer that has been storing carbon, creating the oxygenated planet that we live on. So this is her imagining of how we might co-evolve with machine beings. She has collaborated with people to make an AI system called Emptiness that's been trained on her work, and it is now creating these 3D animated artworks itself. So she imagines the possibility of this system making work after her death, and what does that mean? She is very interested in Buddhist philosophy, and there is a questioning of these kind of cycles of existence and how that may be changing or evolving now with our relationship with machines.
We were really trying to give people a completely different way in of understanding. So as an artwork, it's also a provocation to see differently.
People are understanding something deeper about these new technologies by looking at these works.
The things that I've heard range from feeling seen, with stories that are not often told, and being able to experience that.
I'm hoping that it unlocks a level for them in some way.
I think art will be there because machines for me are not capable of dealing with the impossible. Because art is about the impossible. It's about the maybe, what can be, what could be, and that's our role.